Well, as we get into, it's actually kind of a perfect segue. The series title for this Christmas series is simply called "The Weary World Rejoices." And the reality is we do live in weary times and in a weary world, don't we? We live in times that are difficult. We live in times that sometimes you scratch your head and go, what is going on here? That song lyric is a thrill of hope, and the weary world rejoices. I think about that first spark of hope that I had as a kid when I first started following Jesus. That first spark of hope I had when I read my Bible for the first time and went, wow, I think there is a God, and I think that God really does love me, and I think that God actually did come as Jesus and die on the cross and save me from my sins. And I just remember thinking, wow, the possibilities are endless. This is incredible. I love that. The idea that, like, I don't have anything to worry about because God is in charge, and I'm good with that. And then we have this sense where you turn the news on, and good news doesn't sell. There's no such thing as good news. The stuff that gets viewers is all the bad news. Like, you flip the news on this morning and you find out in Stockton there was a shooting and 4 people died. You flip the news on and find out that some major catastrophe happened around the world. And you flip the news on and you figure out that, like, oh man, what's happening between Venezuela and the United States right now? Like, what is happening? And there's all of this sense that we should be weary, we should be afraid, we should be scared. But the reality is that in Jesus, the weary world can actually have shouts of rejoicing because of not just the comfort, not just the peace, not just the good feelings of Christmas, but that the God of the universe stepped out of his privileged place of heaven and came to dwell with us because he loves us. It's like all the junk in the world can be going on, and we realize, wow, God came to be with us. Emmanuel, God with us. That's what Christmas is all about. So one of the things that we're doing this Christmas season is we're going to go through, normally we talk about hope, joy, love, peace, and that's sort of the traditional cadence of what Christmas does. Those are the traditional things we do, and I typically stick to tradition. But this year I want to divert from that just a little bit. Today we're going to talk about Jesus as king, and then next week we're going to talk about him as priest, and then the week after that we're going to talk about him as prophet, and we're going to talk about him as all these different Old Testament archetypes sort of come to life. Like that God was preparing all through the Old Testament for Jesus to be viewed a certain way, and one of those ways is a king. And we're going to look at that today. But I was reminded as I was thinking about this, I was like, you know what? We actually live in a world that doesn't want kings. We don't want a king in our world. In fact, I'm going to say a name, and I think there's this one name in the last maybe 110 years that has changed the world more than you know, and probably none of you know this name. It's a name that radically changed the world, but nobody knows who he is. Some of you might know when I say his name. Gavrilo Princip is a Serbian national who changed our world today as we know it. In 1911, he joined a secret society called Young Bosnia, and this group was a politically aware group that wanted to free Bosnia from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Do you guys remember history class? Put on your thinking caps. It's coming again just for a minute. And in 1913, and again, I'm not making this up. This is true. This is not a movie. This is true. He received some military training from another group called the Black Hand. Like, again, I'm not making that up. It's absolutely true. And when the Archduke of Austria and his wife came to visit, they were next in line to be king and queen of Austria-Hungary and then rule over Serbia as well. And the kind of irony of it is the Archduke at the time, not that we need to get into Austro-Hungarian politics, but the Archduke at the time wanted to free Serbia. But he didn't know that. Princip, Gavrilo. And he came in a convertible car. Cars were new back then. It was newer for them to do. And he's got this driver, this route, and it was the craziest story because Gavrilo wanted to kill him, and he tried the first time, and the gun jammed or something like that. And so, or it was a bomb. The bomb didn't go off, and so he ran to another spot. He had another shot of where he knew he was going to be, and he jumped in his car, and he killed the Archduke and his wife. This, of course, sparked World War I. World War I, at the end of the day, I call this event the bullet in the head of the old world. Because after World War I, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Kingdom of Montenegro, and the Romanovs, a 500-year political dynasty in Russia, all fell. 500-year dynasties went away. And all of a sudden, we have the emergence of a new world. Why? We don't want these kings to rule over us. And Gavrilo Princip decided that he would take matters into his own time and say, we don't want a king. Now, did he know that 20 million people would die? Did he know that it would radically rearrange global politics? Did he know that this would be probably the single most earth-shattering war in history because it led to all these other wars and battles and things that we're still dealing with today? Did he know that? Probably not. Maybe he wouldn't have done it if he knew. But the whole point in his head was, I don't want a king. Our country, the Black Hand, we don't want a king. We want to rule over ourselves. And when you think about that sentiment of, I don't want a king, I want to be in charge, isn't that sort of the same problem that we all have today? I don't want a king, I want to be in charge. And then you take matters into your own hands, and then, probably the stakes were a little higher for Gavrilo Princip than maybe it would be for you. Like, hopefully you're not rearranging global politics when you say, I don't want a king, I want to do it my own way. But he rearranged global politics because of it. We live in a culture that wants the benefits of a king without the accountability of a king. We live in a culture that the biggest critique even of our, like half the country in our society today is like, oh, we don't want a king, no kings. And that, I'm not trying to get political with you, but that's just the reality of our world today. The idea of having a king over us, like, you guys, this is America. Do you remember how we started? We were in rebellion against King George. The whole idea is we don't want that. We'll do it our way. And this is a sentiment that lives within us so much. And it's important to dive into. And it's a sentiment that actually was opposite early on in Israel. So I want to take you guys through a biblical journey. We're going to end with Jesus being king. I'm going to tell you the end and the beginning. But I want to take you through this biblical journey real fast to help you see why it's so revolutionary that we look at Jesus as king and why you and I bow to the king and actually do have a king. Because I could see some of the rest of the world saying, well, I don't want that guy as my king, or I don't want this guy as my king. I want this person with my values as a king. But why it's so revolutionary that we say we have a king. And that king is on the throne. And then we give him all the praise, all the glory, all the honor. And he is sovereign, and I'm not. So let's walk through that because we live in a society that desperately says, and for the last couple hundred years, has done away with kings. So all through the Torah, the Old Testament, there's this little thread that gets woven through the entirety of the Bible. Let me read this to you. You guys might remember the story of Balaam. He's got this donkey that talks to him. You know that story? Balaam goes out and he's hired by the king of Moab to go speak mean things, mean oracles about Israel. And so as he walked there, the donkey's like, hey, your way is reckless. Don't keep going. And he beats his donkey, Man, I just thought about that. There's a different way to say that. But he beats the donkey. A couple of you got that. Okay. And he tries to speak like what the king of Moab tells him, to speak negative oracles on the people of Israel. Instead, God only uses Balaam, this sorcerer, to bless Israel. Numbers 23:9. From the rocky peaks I see them. From the heights I view them. I see a people who live apart and do not consider themselves one of the nations. God bless you. I see this people of Israel. They're set apart. They're not one of the nations. This is a very key, very important text for Israel. Israel is set apart. They're not like the others. They do this. They've got a different leadership structure. While everyone else has kings, Yahweh is their king, and they follow this pillar of smoke through the desert because that's the presence of the Lord. Yes, they may have priests. Yes, they've got prophets, and they've got people who are interceding on behalf, but there's not like a king there. It's a very different national setup. Deuteronomy, and this is just 2 verses of tons and tons and tons of verses, by the way. We just don't have time to go through it all. Deuteronomy 4:8. And what other nation is so great to have such a righteous decrees and laws, this body of laws I'm setting before you today? Moses is talking to Israel, distinguishing Israel because it's saying, look, we're not like the other nations. We've got the 10 commandments. Look at us. We are not like the other ones. We are different. The Lord has made a covenant with us. We're not like the wicked because God is leading us. And this sets us apart from other nations. We're God's holy, chosen people who he has covenanted with. And he leads personally. This is incredible that Moses is talking about this, that we're not like the other nations. And now you were with us for the last 4 weeks. We walked through the book of Ruth together. And we talked about the political climate during the book of Judges and Ruth and how terrible it was and how up and down Israel was. And then right after the book of Ruth, you get to 1 Samuel. And what happens there is that you begin to see, you got this guy named Eli, and he's kind of the priest of Israel, but he's wicked, and his sons don't follow in his ways. And so the people come to Samuel, who's the next guy in charge after Eli dies. And they're like, look, your sons are even wicked now, Samuel. And Eli's sons are wicked. We don't know what to do. We need a different leadership structure. And so in 1 Samuel 8, 4-5, we get this. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, you are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. That's nice. You're old. Your sons don't follow in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. Do you get that? There's a thread of teaching all the way through the Torah that says you're not like the other nations. You're set apart. You're unique, Israel. You're different from the rest. You have a covenant. Other people don't. And after a bunch of years, they come together. They realize we don't really like the way this is working out. So they say, give us a king such as the other nations have. Look, Samuel, we know that God has called us not to be like one of the nations, but that's not working out. Give us a king, like the other nations. These words are so specific. They're actually self-condemning words that condemn the speaker. But let's keep going a little bit more as we keep reading this. 1 Samuel 8, verses 6-9. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told them, listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from this day, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Now listen to them. But warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. So this is an interesting passage. Samuel is like, look, God, I don't like this. The people are asking for a king. I'm not going to do that because in the political structure of Israel, it's always been, we've got these judges and God is the king over all of it. And Samuel knows this. But the people come to Samuel and say, give us a king. And what they're asking for is a mutiny, it's a rebellion, it's a coup d'etat against the Lord. Give us a person who will rule and reign over us. See, because the idea of Israel before, all the way through the book of Judges, is when you're obedient and when you're doing what God has asked you to do, life goes well because God protects you. But when you go after false gods, when you go after and serve these false idols, then guess what? Midian comes in and destroys. Guess what? Moab comes in and destroys. Guess what? All these other nations come in and destroy you. And so these people are like, look, we want a king. Why? Because we want protection without having to have obedience. Don't we all kind of want that in our lives a little bit too? If we were just to be a little bit honest. In fact, this is your first fill-in in your notes. Israel wanted protection without the obedience. And that's what a king would offer. A king would take a census. A king would raise an army. A king would have this national defense force always protecting the border, always aware of the threat that's coming in. And a king would build this great dynasty and great empire. And they would be great among the other nations. That's what Israel wanted. If we have a king, we could live however we want and be protected. We could live in sin and open rebellion to God and not have to deal with the consequences. If we have this king, then we're going to be fine. We could just reject God and be fine. That's what they wanted. And so God says, look, they've rejected me as king, Samuel, so give them what they want, even though it's bad for them. I think this is kind of an important point, by the way. God tells Samuel to give them what they want, even though it would be bad for them. Sometimes God does that. We go, God, we want this. And he's like, it's bad for you, it's bad for you, it's bad for you. And then he lets us have it to show us this was bad for us. Oh, maybe my way isn't the right way. So a new king comes, and they appoint this guy named Saul, and he's a lesser king, and that brings me to my next fill in the blank. When we reject God as king, we always choose a lesser king. When you think about that one for a second. When you reject God as king, you always choose a lesser king, even if it's you. You're the lesser king. When we reject God as king, and what happened in the book of 1 Samuel is they rejected God as king, and the king that they brought in was Saul. He was taller than everybody else. He was handsome. He looked like a king, and that was about the only qualifications for this guy, Saul. And he looked like a good king. But he was a sinful king. And there was over and over and over again, Saul would lose the kingdom by doing dumb things, and that's a story for another day. But 1 Samuel 13:14, but now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command. This was something that God said to Saul. Look, you looked like a king, but you weren't good. So I've chosen a person after my own heart, and I'm going to raise that person up. A king, with a man who is still searching after God's own heart. A king that will desire God's desires and will want what God wants. And we find that king in 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. And they're talking about the older brothers. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So we get this idea that the next king that's coming after Saul is one who has a heart that loves God and goes after the rule and reign of God in his life. We get that sense. And that person is David, Israel's greatest king. He would be a king that would go after God's own heart. He would be a king that would usher in the worship of the Lord. He would be a king that would sort of codify Israel, a king that would take the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom and unify all of Israel. He would defeat Philistines. He would do amazing things for the Lord. He would take, and we talked about this during our worship series where he danced before the Lord and he ushered in the ark into Israel. David would do all kinds of incredible things. And one time, David said, hey, Lord, I just love you so much. I want to build a house for you. I want to build this temple for you. And God said, no, there's too much blood on your hands, basically. I'll do something for you, though. And in 2 Samuel 7, we see this. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever. before me. Your throne will be established forever. So somehow, David's throne, even though he'll die, will be established forever. And this sets up the idea in the Old Testament that a king is coming who will sit on David's throne, who will rule forever. It sets this idea up. So the next fill-in is God promises a forever throne, and only Jesus can fulfill it. And the reason why is because you need somebody who lives forever to fulfill an eternal throne. But Jesus died. Well, he rose again. And once you've defeated death, you never die again. So you've got this person in Jesus who could fulfill it. And the rest of the Bible, by the way, all the prophets will look forward to this coming king, a king that will actually be good. Israel had a lot of bad kings, but a king that will actually be good, a king that will actually rule the way God wants him to rule. And so we've got this great text that we read at Christmas time. Isaiah 9, 1 through 7. It says this, "Nevertheless, there will be more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But the future, he will honor Galilee by the nations, by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in a land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged a nation. You have increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as they did in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." This is all the way through the book of Isaiah, by the way. That in no uncertain terms do we learn a king is coming, a child will be born, and he will be born in the line of Israel's greatest king, David, the king that had a heart that was after God's own heart. That's the kind of king that we're going to get. And in this text in Isaiah 9, there's these incredible words, very specific names to be given to this king. We're going to call him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. We'll call this king. Like, can you call a human mighty God? That doesn't make sense. Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. How can you call a human that? This must be what they were wondering, but the idea always was God will come and reclaim the throne that he was kicked out of from 1 Samuel. He had a bunch of humans fill the throne, and the humans, even though Israel had a really great king in David, he wasn't all great. David messed up too. He did some stuff. But Isaiah reminds us that the true king will bring true light, bring true justice, and will bring peace without end. There will be no corruption. You know, every administration in the world that's ever governed in the world has faced corruption. Like, I don't care who you're a fan of or who you're not a fan of or whatever, they've all had corruption. And this king, somehow, there will not be corruption. He will reign with true justice and righteousness. I love this. And then we turn to the very beginning of the book of Matthew. Matthew's looking for this king. He's looking for it. And so Matthew starts in a very Old Testament way, and he writes a genealogy. One of these days we'll have to do a study on genealogies, you guys, because they're so good. Anyways, we're not today. Just a little bit here. Matthew 1:6. And Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Think about those lines for a second. Some of you might know the story of David and Bathsheba. And if you're new to the church, or if you're new to the Bible at all, let me just give you the Twitter version of that story. David sees this beautiful woman bathing on a roof. He knows that it's Uriah's wife. In fact, in the book of 1 Chronicles, it lists David's mighty men. One of them is a guy named Uriah the Hittite. So this is like David's bodyguard. He's off. Uriah the Hittite is off to war. David looks down from a rooftop and goes, "Your wife is looking good." And he brings her to his chambers. You can't refuse the king. He kind of forces himself on her. She becomes pregnant. It's going to be found out, so he has Uriah killed. Even though this guy who's after God's own heart, he still had some pretty massive corruption. Even though he was Israel's greatest king, he wasn't perfect. He still had some pretty horrible things that he did in his life. And I love that Matthew just casually writes in the genealogy, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Think about the way that's written. He could have said whose mother was Bathsheba. But he's reminding us as the reader 2,000 years later that, look, Jesus is entering into a broken family of people to redeem it. That's what he's doing. And that's what he does every time he comes into your life. He enters into brokenness to bring redemption because he's a different kind of king. In fact, the next fill-in is Jesus is the king who enters a broken family to redeem broken people. He's that kind of king that doesn't lead with corruption, that doesn't lead with self-interest, that doesn't lead with needing to make his name great. He's the kind of king that leads with redemption. So Matthew writes these, frankly, very damning words in his genealogy. I just love how he says, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. It's just this little stab at David. Like, David was our greatest king, and yet he had an affair and had a man killed. He took another man's wife. And you got these messed up people all through Jesus' lineage, and that all that comes out, the Messiah comes out of that. Even the way Matthew writes the story is a reminder that David stole this other man's wife, had him killed. But it's also an indication that Jesus is coming from, Jesus is fulfilling this promise of a new Davidic king. He's fulfilling that promise. Matthew 2:2, the story keeps going. Jesus is born, Magi come from the east, and they go to King Herod, and they ask, where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? You notice that word king. We saw his star, and when rose, we've come to worship him. Wow. They go to King Herod and say, where's the real king? Which is, by the way, a crazy thing to do when you think about who King Herod was, who saw himself as the king of the Jews. We saw a star, a sign in the heavens that this king was born, and we want to go worship the real king. Of course, this will drive Herod crazy. He'll murder a bunch of innocent babies, and Jesus will flee down to Egypt with his parents. But the Gospel of Matthew does not want you to mistake who's the true king. You've got this question before a man of immense political power, King Herod. Where's the real king? The real king is in the manger. The real king is come as a baby. Matthew 4:23. This is what the real king does. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. A king has a kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. You guys, even the gospel, and this is another fill-in, the gospel, when we talk about like accepting the gospel and what that is, what Jesus said the gospel is the good news of the kingdom. The gospel is the good news of a new kingdom and king. That's what we're proclaiming people. Like, hey, yeah, people are like, the world is messed up. We're like, yeah, we know. We have a different king. We have a different king than all the kings of the world. We have a different ruler than all the rulers of the world have ever been. Because the world just keeps on repeating itself. You know that old adage, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You've probably heard that before. This is just what it does. Too much human power is not good for somebody, but somehow Jesus' power came through gentleness. Somehow Jesus' power came through forgiveness. Somehow Jesus' power came where there was healing, a kingdom where God reigns. He comes where in his kingdom, sickness has no power in his kingdom. Darkness has no standing in his kingdom. And Jesus begins to grow a reputation because he goes around acting like a king, touching people, healing people. He goes around doing things like that, feeding people. This is what kings do during Jubilees. They feed people. And sometimes when you see somebody excelling really well, sometimes we have perverse desires when it comes to a king. Our perverse desire sometimes is we want to become king makers, huh? We're like, ooh, that guy could be in charge. That guy could be a leader. Even if it's like a small organization or something like that, we're like, we'll put that person in charge because then you could be the man behind the man. Then you could be the person who got that person to where they want to be. And what's better than being the king? Getting the king in place. You have all the friendship of the king, but when all the backlash happens, it goes to the king, right? It's on him, not me. You get none of the backlash of being in leadership. And Jesus would deal with this actually all the time. People saw Jesus and how incredible he was and all the people coming to him. And he's out there proclaiming a kingdom. And so you got people coming up to him. John 6:15 says this, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Jesus fed the 5,000, and then they were going to go make him king by force, and Jesus refused this. Why? Because he wasn't going to be beholden to a bunch of kingmakers, because only Jesus can install himself as king. No other people can give him authority as king. Jesus himself has the authority of being king, so he refuses that. He would not be made king by force. He would not be beholden to a constituency. He is truly sovereign. But there's even more instances where his closest followers saw him and said, we cannot wait until you start your political kingdom here on earth. In fact, literally in Luke, Jesus was taking communion with his disciples, and the very next scene in communion at the Last Supper is this. Luke 22, verses 24 through 30. A dispute rose among them as to which one of them considered to be the greatest. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. I'm going to pause there. Jesus is reminding them of what all the Torah told them. You are not like the other nations. The Gentiles have kings, and they lord over people. You're not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules over the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who's at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table and in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. That's a much deeper statement we could get into at another time. But here's the point. Jesus' closest followers are still with him saying, we want a kingdom like other nations have. It is the old thing that we just do as humans. We see what other nations have, and we want that, and we want to be better than that. That's what we want. And Jesus is subtly and plainly even reminding them over and over and over again, you're not to be like one of the nations. You're my people. Don't be like them. My Father confirmed a kingdom on me, and I'm conferring one on you. In fact, one of the key things that Jesus said is Jesus' kingdom is not about power, it is about service. Go campaign on that. You will fail miserably. nobody will elect you into leadership, right? Because we want somebody who's going to have great power. Jesus came as the absolute, utter opposite of every king that ever existed and yet still rules on the throne today. Jesus is like, hey, don't make any mistake about what kingdom you are receiving. I am sending you out into all these other kingdoms to serve, not to have power over them, not to lord over people, but to serve, because this is what my kingdom is about. It's about serving. It's not about immense military power. It's not about all the money in the world. It's about sacrifice. It's not a very exciting picture, Jesus. We want like big guns and tanks, and we want like cool jets. I want an aircraft carrier, Jesus. I mean, this is what I want, right? And he's like, I am not like other kings. The gospel is written in such a way to force you to choose what kind of king are you going to want? What kind of king are you going to serve? This whole picture that runs all the way through the Bible is like, are you going to be a king like other nations? Are you going to go after what other nations have? Or is Jesus going to be your king? All comes to a head at Jesus' trial. John 19, verses 14 through 15. It was the day of the preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away and crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar. The chief priest answered. Wow. Israel has had this problem, which is essentially going after the wrong king. They've had this problem from the foundations of Israel all the way up to when Jesus is standing there on trial, and they shout, we have no king but this human king, Caesar, who's a pagan king, by the way. Our entire world history is of setting kings up and tearing them down. If you look at world history, that's really what it comes down to. It's setting up a kingdom and tearing it down. Setting up an empire and it falling. Down with kings, up with kings. Guerrilla precepts everywhere in our world. But the real question is, how many times have we given our allegiance to the Caesars of this world rather than the king who is nailed to the throne of the cross? How many times have we given over our allegiance? Have we given over our love? Have we given over our resources to the kings that are just playing in this world? How many times have we been the ones who have stood there and said, we have no king but Caesar? How many times have we been that guy? The manger is this unlikely place for a king, but it's a king that will be born humbly, to walk with us humbly, to serve us humbly, and to call you into that same kingdom. He lived a life where a king would give his whole self away, and he calls us to do the same. Accepting Jesus as king is accepting that we live completely set apart and in a different kingdom than the other kingdoms. Yeah, we do live in America. Yes, we've got governors and we've got mayors and we've got presidents, and we should pray for them, and they have an incredibly hard job to do and all that stuff. But we should never mistake them for the true king. We should never mistake them for who's really in charge. Jesus set up a kingdom with no military, no political banners, no constituency, and he would be nailed to the cross in humiliation and be labeled. The throne would actually be labeled, did you know that, as his throne? Luke 23:38, there was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." John Howard Yoder once said, "The cross is not a detour or a hurdle on the way to the kingdom, nor is it the way to the kingdom. It is the kingdom come." Jesus is born into a narrative where there's already kings. Jesus is born into a setting where people wanted to take and make him king by force. It's just the way of the world. and he does nothing a king would do. All he does is go out and feed the hungry, heal the sick, feed people on the Sabbath, reach out to the poor and marginalized, love prostitutes, love people who've been kicked out of the church, love people who are on the margins of society. This is who they crucified. And when they crucified him, he took the ultimate throne and became the king of the universe. The question I have for you is, what king will you serve? What thread of teaching will you be under when it comes to the Old Testament and the New Testament? Are you going to stand up and say, give us a king such as the other nations have? Or are you going to be the one that says, no, God has set me apart to be somebody different. God has set me apart from all of that because Jesus is king in my life. Are you the type of person that says, gives lip service to that and says, but really I'm the king? I'm in charge, and all other people have to bow down to my kingdom and my lordship and my authority, and I'm going to lord over other people. Christmas reminds us that a king is coming in the line of David who will run a completely different kingdom and who will call you to a brand new life, who wants to redeem all the junk of your family past and history and trauma and whatever might be there. He wants to enter into the human story to redeem it and to make you new. That's what Christmas reminds us of, that Jesus is king. I want to invite the band up. And as we close today, what I would say is I think what the Bible is doing here when it comes to a king, like I love looking over the totality of the Bible. And I think what the totality of the Bible is saying is, who will you choose? The Bible is absolutely saying, who will you choose? I mean, you think about, we have no king but Caesar. Sometimes we say that through our actions. Or will you choose the Messiah, the one who has taken your sin on the cross? I want to encourage you to simply confess, Jesus, you're the king of the universe and of my life. I want to challenge you to take Jesus as your king, because as you do, you dethrone yourself as king. Remember, whenever you choose another king other than God, you choose a lesser king, and that lesser king is usually you. So maybe it's time to lay yourself down before the Lord this morning and say, Jesus, you truly are king. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we just thank you for coming, stepping out of heaven and into our lives, and taking that mantle of leadership, becoming the king of our lives, becoming the king of the universe. God, there's some people here today who simply need to say, God, I lay myself down. I set myself up as king each and every day, and it gets me in trouble. That's not the way I want to live. God, I lord over others. I lord over my family. I lord over my kids. I lord over my wife. I lord over my husband. One of the two. I set myself up as king. God, forgive me. You are the king, not only of Israel, you are the king of my life. You are the king of the universe. You are the king of all. And we give ourselves to you. Thank you for entering the human story, for entering into brokenness just to redeem it. We love you, Lord.